what we can learn from nature, what we can learn from Sow-in, and what we can learn from these redwoods is that when we take the time to slow down, to go inwards, to rest, and to truly hibernate, we will actually have so much more energy to bloom again in the spring. Hello, my friends. Welcome to It's All Magic. I am your guide, your host, and your friend, Devin Hine. And here we'll be discussing how to make your life truly feel like magic. I believe that our very existence on Earth is nothing less than a miracle, and that we all have so much potential to learn, to grow, to experience, and to create during our short time here. It is both my passion and my pleasure to walk this path of life optimization by your side, where we'll discuss topics like passion, purpose, intuition, manifestation, physical well-being, and much, much more. I'm a yoga teacher, a meditation and breathwork facilitator, and a national board certified health and wellness coach. But more importantly, I am an eternal optimist, a lover of life, and a forever student. It is my hope that with each and every episode, you too will finally start to believe it really is all magic after all. Ready to dive in? Let's do it. Hello, everyone. Hola, bonjour, konnichiwa. I hope you are doing so beautifully well these days. I'm sending you all of my love and all of my hugs through the screen and through the audio. Happy day after Halloween if you're listening to this on the day that this comes out, or happy Sow-in if you're listening to this on the day that this comes out. If you did not understand the word that I just said when I said happy Sow-in, fear not, because I will be walking you through what exactly I'm talking about in just a moment. But before we dive into all of the fun and the goodies and the inspiration and the information that I have in store for you today, I want to invite us to take our 3 deep breaths together. If you have the ability, I want you to inhale through the nose for a count of 4 and then exhale through the nose for a count of 8. If possible, if you are not surrounded by other people where you might feel self-conscious, I invite you to actually slightly hum on your exhale. What this will do is this will help to trigger your vagus nerve, which is one of your cranial nerves. There are 12 sets of cranial nerves. Your vagus nerve is essentially your main parasympathetic nerve. So your parasympathetic nervous system is the part or the branch of your nervous system that helps you relax and calm down. So we want to trigger that nerve so that we can switch out of fight or flight and go into our rest and digest, or our stay and play, which is also known as the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's what the humming will do, but we are also exhaling longer than we're inhaling because that does the exact same thing. So there's your one tip for the day. If there's only one thing you take away from today's podcast episode, I want you to remember that if ever you are overwhelmed, you are stressed, you are anxious, you are just full of a little bit too much jittery energy, I want you to exhale slower and longer than your inhale. If you think about being in the woods and you see a bear across the way, the first thing that we do is we take a deep breath in and we hold our breath, which is why when you slowly take an exhale for a really long time, it tells your body that you are safe. You're not in survival mode. So we will take those breaths together. I will be cueing your inhales and your exhales, but I'll also be breathing with you. So feel free to just breathe along with me. And if you'd like to, you can close your eyes now. And if not, that's perfectly okay as well. So beginning to take our breath in right here, breathing in for 4. Slow exhale for 8. Beautiful. Breathing in for 4. Slow exhale for 8. Last one. Breathe in for 4. And hum it out for 8. And let's just finish off with one more deep breath. So breathing in through the nose, filling up as much as you possibly can. This time, just sigh it out of the mouth. Beautiful. You can flutter, open your eyes if you had them closed. Welcome back. Hello, hola, bonjour once more. Oh, I feel so much better. I feel so much different. Not that I felt bad in any sense before. I was so excited to record this episode, but any chance that we can take those few deep breaths, our body and our mind and our spirit will always thank us. No matter how amazing you're doing, taking those deep breaths just helps to reground you and rebalance you. It brings you back to a sense of harmony and home. So that is my first gift to you today. There will be plenty more. So what I want to talk to you about today is this concept of Sow-in. So I said at the very beginning of this episode, happy Halloween and happy Sow-in. So Samhain is actually the pagan festival or the pagan holiday that was the precursor to today's Halloween. So there's a lot that I want to share with you, but a quick backstory as to why I'm sharing this with you today and how I have gathered some of this information. So I am currently recording this on a Sunday, 2 days before Halloween or 3 days before Samhain, that pagan holiday. Yesterday, on Saturday, Cal and I were really craving just some deep rest. We knew that this weekend was a Taurus full moon and it was also a partial lunar eclipse. And anytime you have any sort of lunar eclipse, it essentially just increases the potency and the power of that full moon energy. And full moon energy is already powerful. So as I've talked about in previous episodes, the moon controls our Earth's oceans. It also controls our bodies if we're women. Our menstrual cycles have been syncing up with the moon's lunar cycles for all of eternity. And so if the moon is powerful enough to control all of the Earth's oceans and our bodies as women, we know that it can also have a deep impact on our moods and our sleep and simply our behavior and our emotions, anything that has to do with life. And so we wanted to take some time to really kind of shut out the outside world. We both actually turned our phones off on Friday night until about Saturday at noon. And we wanted to take some time to journal. We did some breath work. We did some tarot cards, all of that stuff. And it was a really beautiful evening. At one point, I was sitting in the office where I'm sitting right now, and I had told him that I wanted to do some breathing just to calm my nervous system, come back home to myself. And he said, "Oh, amazing. I'm going to go breathe and chant in the other room." So he was doing Kundalini yoga in our bedroom. I was doing breathwork and meditation in the office. And it was just my ideal Friday night. So we began with that. And then on Saturday, we really wanted to connect with nature and just get out of this fast-paced society that we live in. And so I had said to him that I would have loved drinking a little bit of cacao, which I'll explain in a second, and maybe attending some sort of sound bath, something that would be deeply healing on a physical and energetic level. And I'll mention what cacao is. So cacao is essentially this ceremonial drinking chocolate. It's similar to what you're thinking of. If you're hearing cacao and you're thinking chocolate, you're absolutely correct. But it is a really clean and very potent source. So when I say potent, I mean if you do not like 100% dark chocolate, you are going to need to sweeten this puppy a lot. So we made a little bit of cacao. We have these ceremonial grade cacao wafers that we blend with just, hot boiling water. And then I added in some dates and honey to sweeten it. And it was so, so delicious. And the reason why one would drink cacao is for a few reasons. So one is that cacao does have caffeine, which we're aware of, but it actually has even more of a chemical called theobromine, which is similar to caffeine, but the difference is that caffeine works on your nervous system, theobromine works on your cardiovascular system. So there's this very ancient old belief that cacao, chocolate, actually helps to open up your heart, because of course your cardiovascular system is what's pumping blood through your heart all day, every day. And so when you drink cacao, you open up your heart, you tend to become a little bit more vulnerable, and you kind of just reconnect with yourself, and you think everything else in the world is more beautiful. And so it's not a drug in the way we think of drugs, but it is a medicine. I drink that cacao, or I had that cacao yesterday, as did Cal, and we were just high on life. I mean, we've all had chocolate, and we know that chocolate tends to make us very, very happy. So this happened to just be a really clean, really potent source of the good stuff. So I told him that I wanted to have a little cacao and maybe do a sound healing bath where you typically lie down in kind of a meditative state on your back, and a sound healer will use these singing bowls, these sound bowls, to make certain frequencies of sound, and every frequency actually resonates in your body in a certain way and can heal certain stuck energy and trauma and sadness and anxiety. So the sounds are incredibly healing. They're also really, really calming. So that was the energy of what I was looking for. And Cal said, that sounds amazing. I would also sign up for all of that, but I could also really use a forest bath. Now, a forest bath is kind of this ancient Japanese tradition of spending time in the forest and deeply connecting to the nature around you. So you tend to use all 5 of your senses to breathe in the grass and to hug the trees and to hear the sounds of the birds and the ferns swooshing in the wind. And forest baths are so healing as well on that energetic, physical, and emotional level. So we decided to do kind of a combination, as many of these as possible, with one more caveat, just to make this more of a weird collection of ideas. I said I would really like to fully embrace this full moon and perhaps start kind of pre-celebrating Sow-in, which again is that pagan holiday that is coming up. Or if you're listening to this on Wednesday, November 1st, happy Sow-in. Sow-in is today. And so I mentioned that, and we said, okay, great. So we're going to have this beautiful, healing, almost Sabbath-like day, but it's also going to be Sow-in. It's going to involve cacao, maybe sound healing if we can find one, and a forest bath. Easy. Sounds like a perfect Saturday. So that was the intention going in. And my goodness, we pretty much checked all of those off the list, except for the sound healing. We didn't have time for the sound healing, but what we ended up doing was so much better, and it filled up my heart, my soul, my mind. It was absolutely perfect. So what we ended up doing, we had this lovely morning. I woke up before Cal and I went for a walk without my phone because, as I mentioned, I turned off my phone Friday night and I wanted to keep it off until I absolutely needed it. And so I went for about an hour-long walk without any sort of stimulation, no technology, and I just sang to myself the whole time. Every time I go for a walk and I don't have either someone I'm walking with or my phone where I can listen to music or a podcast or whatever, I always sing to myself. It's my form of entertaining myself. It's my form of self-soothing, because as I taught you at the beginning of this episode, anytime you're exhaling longer than you're inhaling, or you're using your vocal cords, you're triggering that vagus nerve. So remember, that parasympathetic nerve. So it's just a way where I get really grounded. I love music. I love singing. I love songs. And so that was the most beautiful, perfect start to the day. And then I came back, we ended up having breakfast, chatting for a while, talking about what the heck we're going to do today. We have so many ideas and intentions. How are we going to make this possible? And finally, we got ready and we decided to hop in the car and drive about an hour south of where we are. So we drove to an area right outside of Santa Cruz, California. If you're familiar with Santa Cruz, it's kind of this coastal hippie beach town. And we love Santa Cruz. There are incredible yoga studios there, all the vegan food you could ever imagine. So all of the things that make us very happy. But as we're driving through, attempting to get to this redwood forest, because that was, Cal's main intention, that forest bath, we ended up driving through this town called Felton, California. We had never heard of Felton, but as we're driving through, we look to our left and we see this yoga studio called Anahata. We see all of these kind of witchy looking stores. We see these boutiques, these really community-based coffee shops. We see jewelry stores, and we thought, oh, let's stop here. This looks like a lot of fun. And so we pull off, we park, and we ended up looking through all of the stores in the area and talking to a lot of the locals. And we just fell in absolute love with this place. Everyone had this warm, friendly, optimistic attitude and energy. You walk into a store and instead of hearing the, welcome in, you hear more of a, hey, hope you're doing well. What's going on today? How can I help you? And so we had a lot of fun kind of bopping into each of the stores. And as we were walking through this downtown area, we stumbled upon this sign. And the sign said something about, Halloween events in Felton, or maybe it said Sow-in events in Felton. And we looked down because it has different dates for all of the weekends in October. And we saw the one that said October 28th, which was yesterday, Saturday, right before Halloween. And it said that at 5 p.m. that day, there was a Sow-in event at this store called Felton Mercantile. And we thought, oh my goodness, how is this happening? This is too good to be true. So we walk into Felton Mercantile. We end up speaking with the owner of the shop, who is an herbalist and a Reiki healer and everything I want to be one day, everything I am on the learning path to becoming one day. And we just had an incredible conversation with her. Of course, she had this long black hair, a fully black outfit, black nails. She had a black cat. She had black candles lit. She had pagan books and clothes and herbs and teas and, healing body washes. It was just a really beautiful, but also eclectic and kind of witchy shop, and I was in absolute heaven. If you know me at all, you know that is just my dream aesthetic. I feel like I have two sides. I have one side that loves all things sunshine and flowers and yellow and joy, and then I also have this dark side, not necessarily where I'm dark. I'm still the same kind of bubbly, sunshiny person, but I really am drawn to kind of the aesthetic of the witch and healer women. I just resonate very deeply with that on kind of a soul level. And so walking into this shop where I see these black candles and this witch healer woman with her black cat named Sid, I truly could not get enough. And I had the deepest conversation with her about her path and her journey, and then my path and my journey, and she even looked at me and she gave me some really beautiful insight where she was kind of reading my energy, and she said, oh, I know that, this thing is next in your path, and then you're also going to be learning this and incorporating that, and you'll be helping and healing a lot of people. And so of course I was just lit up by that comment. And when we went in, we of course asked her, so what is with this Sow-in event? And she said, oh yeah, today at 5 p.m. we have the author. She's actually a local author of some of these pagan books, these novels that I have in my store. And she's going to come and explain some of the history and the rituals of Sow-in, so that if you're interested in incorporating some of that into your own practice, your own lifestyle, you can in the next few days. And we thought, amazing. We'll be back here later today. Thanks. And so after being in the shops for a while, we drove finally over to the Redwoods, and we had a little bit of lunch at picnic tables. And then we went through this really, really grounding walk through the Redwoods. And it's hilarious, you guys, because if I were there alone, I would have absolutely been, looking at the Redwoods, feeling that sense of awe and wonder. But I also would have walked at kind of a normal pace. Cal, who I call my earthman, he just very much embodies that like grounded energy of the earth. We were practically walking backwards, you guys. We were walking so slow, and it was perfect because Cal had grabbed one of the essentially like Redwood tour brochures. So there was a little loop that you could go on, and there were 15 stops along the loop where you would stop and read the brochure. And so he was my tree guide for the day, because that is one of his dream jobs. He literally just embodies a tree. He's tall and lanky like a tree. The colors he looks best in are all kind of autumnal colors, browns, mustards, olive greens. He's just my treeman. He's just my earthman. And then I am all things like air and fire and light. And so we complement each other very, very well. So we end up doing this loop around the Redwoods, and it was just so beautiful. I'll tell you some really amazing facts about the Redwoods later, but I'm just kind of setting the scene, showing you that we had this part of the day that was perfect for me, where we're going to the witchy shops, and then next thing you know, we're in with the Redwoods, and this is perfect for Cal, also perfect for me. But as I just explained, he is a Redwood. So we had that experience. It was amazing. At the end of our little Redwood loop, we actually unfolded these little like fortune papers that we had gotten at the witchy shop, the Felton Mercantile. She had asked us when we walked in, once we explained kind of why we were there, oh, we're interested in the Sow-in event. She said, oh, you might be interested in grabbing some fortunes up front. So we grabbed these little folded fortunes. We ended up reading them in the Redwoods, and it was so funny because Cal's actually made a lot of sense. It said something along the lines of, a decision you will make very soon will have profound impacts in your life. And he was like, oh gosh, I hope that's good. That could be great or terrible. And I was like, oh, that's a great one. And then I read mine, and it says, a secret admirer is waiting for the right time to reveal themselves. And I'm like, what? So anyway, I hope the secret admirer is one of you listeners out there. I hope that's just a way of saying that one of you is really enjoying the podcast. And if you are, let this be a reminder to rate and review the podcast on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. But anyway, that was my fortune. So from there, we went back to that witchy store to have the Sow-in event. And this is where I learned all of the ins and outs of Sow-in. Now, I had actually learned a great deal about Sow-in about 5 years ago when I was still in college. One of my favorite classes that I ever took, actually, my two favorite classes that I ever took, you'll see a strong theme here. The first one I took my freshman year, and it was one of the potential required electives. It was in the School of Religious Studies, and it was world religions. And so that's actually where I learned about meditation. I had ended up going to this local Buddhist temple where I took this beginner meditation class, and that kind of kicked off my yoga journey. And then years and years later, my senior year, I decided to take another class in the School of Religious Studies from the same teacher who I really adored. And I took a class all about paganism, rituals, and magic. And it was so interesting, you guys. Cal and I actually went to, it might have been a Druid ritual. There was some pagan ritual that we attended in Columbus as part of the class. And it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. You know, they had a strong belief in fairies actually being of this world. And so the children of the people that were leading the ritual actually build these fairy houses that they put on their bedroom windows or on the windowsill so that the fairies can come in. And so that was a really, really unique and memorable experience. And so all these years later, I had another opportunity to learn about one of these pagan rituals. And if you couldn't tell already, I am fascinated by all different kinds of religions and rituals and practices, and really anything that helps us bring meaning into our lives, I think is a positive thing. I am definitely here to bring in more love and light and meaning into the world. So when we went to this Sow-in event, I got to relearn many of the things that I had learned and honestly forgotten from 5 years prior. So let's start with some of the basics. So as I mentioned, Samhain was the pre-Christian precursor to Halloween. Everything that we know of today as Halloween is actually pagan. So this dates back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. There are relics from about 2,500 years ago that show that Samhain was celebrated then, but recently they actually even discovered some older relics that date back about 5,000 years ago that show that Samhain was probably celebrated then too. So it is a really, really old Celtic tradition. And I love learning about just the similarities between Samhain and Halloween and how we can bring some of the really beautiful concepts and themes of Samhain into our lives, because there are some themes that Samhain represents that Halloween has forgotten, and Halloween has kind of stuck with just the fun of it all. But there's just a concept that I want to bring back into our lives through this episode. So Samhain is celebrated from the night of the 31st of October into November 1st. That's because the way that calendars were for these, ancient pagan Celts is that they would actually count a day starting from sundown until sundown. So it would essentially start in the evening on one day until sundown the next evening. So Samhain was celebrated again from the night of Halloween of October 31st until November 1st. But that was day one of Samhain. It was really a 3-day fire festival. And it was the Harvest Fire Festival. So Samhain punctuates time right in the middle of the autumn equinox, which is when autumn begins, and the winter solstice, when winter begins. So Samhain is the exact midway point between the two, and it is the point in time when we stop harvesting in the fields and we bring in everything that we could gather and we start preserving them for the colder, darker months ahead. So it's this chance to kind of come inwards and slow down a little bit, because all of the labor of summer has already finished. There's nothing more that we can do. We accomplished what we could accomplish. We harvested what we could harvest. We grew what we could grow. And now we are gathering that, kind of ordering it, organizing it, counting it, and then preserving it. And so that's what Samhain was. It was this fire festival to celebrate the end of the harvest. But Samhain, as I mentioned, has a lot in common with Halloween. And the main aspect of that is that on Samhain, the pagans would dress up in these costumes. And the reason why is because they actually had a belief that the world was far more complex than what you can see with the human eye. There was a belief that there were multiple layers of reality laid one on top of another. And the layer of reality that was right past ours was the layer or the world that contained these dead spirits. So whether it's our deceased loved ones or malevolent spirits, as well as certain beings like fairies. And when I say fairies, I don't mean Tinkerbell from Peter Pan. These were not cute, fluttery little sparkly fairies that wanted to do good for you. No. These were malevolent beings. And it was believed back then that these fairies could try to kidnap you, they could harm your crops, they could harm your animals, they could kill you. And so you did not want to mess or play with the fairies. And so when Samhain rolled around, because there was a belief that on Samhain, the veil between this world and the next is the thinnest it will be all year round, they began to dress up in these costumes. They actually called it guising or mumming, so that they would blend in with the fairies and the fairies wouldn't notice them, so that they couldn't kidnap them or in some way harm or even kill them. So that is where the practice, the ritual of dressing up on Halloween began. And then even more than that, on the evening of Samhain, they would hold what was called a dumb supper. So of course, dumb means mute in this case. So this mute or silent supper was a supper that they would prepare to welcome in deceased spirits, hopefully the spirits of their deceased loved ones, and have this silent dinner that's kind of solemn and very dark. Everything is black. The tablecloths are black and the napkins are black and the plates are black and the candles are black. And the only light you can have is from this candle. And you open up the doors and the windows to let the spirits into your home. You set a placemat, you set a place at the table for your deceased loved ones to come. And you usually actually reserve the best seat at the table for your deceased loved ones. And then everyone else is sitting around there. And you are quiet, you are silent the whole supper. And it's this chance to welcome your loved ones back into the home, because the pagans actually feared that now that the leaves are dying and the leaves are falling off and the meadows aren't as lush and comfortable as they might have been to lay in during the summer, where will our deceased loved ones go? They were worried that their loved ones were, out in the world and now they're going to be cold and uncomfortable. So they would open the windows, as I said, let them back into the home and actually set a place for them at the table. So it was this chance to reconnect with their deceased ancestors. And then at the end of the supper, they would typically place what they called a soul cake out, which was kind of this spiced cookie cake. And they would place the soul cake out again for their deceased loved ones to come and have some more food. So they would usually have a seat by the hearth, by the fire, that they would keep stoked all night long so that those spirits could have a warm, comfortable place to sit and eat their soul cake. But it quickly became tradition that other villagers in the village would come visit, home to home. And they would pay their respects to your deceased loved ones. And then in return, you would give them some of your soul cake. And so that was the very beginning of trick-or-treating. So of course, now we go around and we get candy from our neighbors. But the tradition, the original tradition, was that you would go around, you were actually paying your respects and your prayers and your love to their deceased loved ones. And then you would get some of their soul cake, which again is that spiced cookie cake. So that was the whole concept of trick-or-treating, the whole concept of dressing up, the belief that there's kind of this eerie spookiness around Halloween or Samhain, that the veil between this world and the next is the thinnest. And so even today, I've heard it is a very, very common time to hold a seance. And not just because of the pop culture stereotypes of Halloween, that it's this kind of dark, witchy time of year, but truly dating back to 5,000 years ago when Samhain was maybe first starting to be celebrated. There was still this concept that the world between the spirits and the world of man became one, that the veil dropped. So that can be either spooky to you or perhaps beautiful to you, depending on what your particular rituals are. I actually said to Cal yesterday that I would love to hold a dumb supper. I had actually learned about a dumb supper a few years ago, and the concept really resonated with me because I know in certain cultures they have ancestor ancestor worship, I suppose, or ancestor reverence, where they pay their respects to their ancestors and their deceased loved ones. And I feel like in America, we've lost that a little bit. We have lost any sort of ritualistic meaning around death and any sort of beauty that we once assigned to the cycle of life and death. It's a very kind of sanitized, distant process for us now where someone dies, we don't really know what to do. You don't know what to say to someone when someone in their family's died. And then we kind of brush it under the rug and keep going. Whereas in so many other cultures, and some of them still practicing it today, there are these rituals and these practices that help keep you connected to your deceased loved ones and chances for you to consistently and frequently remember them in a really warm and beautiful way. It doesn't always have to be this sad, solemn experience. Although the dumb supper was kind of a combination where it is silent and solemn, and yet at the same time, there's this joy at having your deceased loved ones come in and eat your soul cake and sit by the fire that you have, particularly prepared for them. I think the only other thing that's kind of interesting is just that the reason why this turned into Halloween, or also known as All Hallows Eve, is that when the Christians were colonizing these pagan people, they essentially put their own kind of Christian twist on these pagan rituals that had been celebrated for thousands and thousands and thousands of years before Christianity even existed. And so what these particular Christian sects did is they said, okay, well, around Samhain, we are going to use this time to venerate and respect and, give reverence to saints that have fallen within the Christian faith. And in addition to that, it became a day where people could pray to get their deceased loved ones out of purgatory and into heaven. So they went along the same lines of the veil between this world and the next being thinned, but they used it to, pray and to pay homage to those saints that had fallen. And so they began calling it All Hallows Day, All Saints Day, and then the night before became All Hallows Eve, which slowly became Halloween. So you can see how these Christian and pagan traditions are inherently interlocked just because of the history of colonization and intermixing. But originally, historically, Halloween was a pagan ritual. So that was Samhain. That was a lot of what we learned. And of course, they were discussing that apples are eaten at this time of year. And that's why we have bobbing for apples in certain, Halloween parties or pumpkin patches. And the reason is because, of course, apples were ready to be harvested this time of year. But even though they would preserve most of them for the winter, as you know, any apples that you get that have a bruise on them, you have to eat them fast or they will go bad. So they would essentially set aside all of the apples. They did the same thing with potatoes, by the way. I would set aside all of the apples or potatoes that had bruises on them, and they would prepare lots of food with those. So traditionally for Samhain, you do eat a lot of apple-related dishes and potato-related dishes, things with hazelnuts and chestnuts as well. And then they would preserve everything else for those dark winter months. And at the end of the event last night, they showed us, they were preparing this Samhain box that you could purchase that had, just some of the ritualistic concepts. So there were candles and there were smudge sticks where you can essentially light a bundle of sage, for example, and it's believed that the smoke will help to purify the room and get rid of malevolent negative spirits. So it was a really beautiful event. We had even begun the event by what's called casting a circle, where everyone stands up and you essentially pay reverence to the spirits and the gods, both at north, at east, at south, and at west, and you close the circle and you sit down and you open it up. You open up the space. So I really, really loved that. And there's a connection that I wanted to make today between Sow-in, this certain concept that I'm about to highlight, and the Redwoods, because I realized at the end of the day that there was this inherent link that I really wanted to share with you all. So before I explain the link, I want to jump to the Redwoods for a second. So if you are unfamiliar with Redwoods, or you haven't had the opportunity, the pleasure of seeing Redwoods in real life, I want to paint a picture for you. First of all, Redwoods are the most awe-inspiring, awe-inducing thing of nature I think I have ever seen. Of course, oceans do that as well. Anything that is just large and vast. Canyons might do that, mountains do that, but redwoods almost invoke, I wouldn't say fear, but they tower over us so much that you feel so small. And it puts into perspective just how little we are on this world. And how young we are as well. When we entered into the Redwood Park yesterday, there was this huge slab, kind of a cutout of a redwood tree that had fallen years before. So you could see the full, diameter and width of the trunk. And it showed on the trunk, based on calculations of the different tree rings, it showed that that particular tree was about 2,200 years old. So it was in the ground in California long before Jesus was born. And it was still there when the Magna Carta was signed. It was still there when Shakespeare was born and the Declaration of Independence was signed. And when all of these things in history that we have only heard about and read about happened, the redwood was there. The redwood saw it all. The redwood was learning and listening and observing. And I really do feel that way about trees. I feel like trees are exactly like the mother willow in Pocahontas, if you've seen that she's so wise and grounded, and she listens more than she speaks. And, there's a reason we have two ears and one mouth, that we're meant to just take in a lot of the world and learn from it and internalize it and observe. And that's what trees do. So trees really do teach us a lot. So in this old growth forest, it's called an old growth forest because these are old growth redwoods. So they've been there a long time. So as I mentioned, it is documented that redwoods do live to at least 2,200 years old. So 2,200 years old, which is incredible. And I'm sure they can live longer than that. That's just all we have documented. So they live so long. And part of the reason is because the only predator to the redwood is the human being. And I'll explain why. So that red tint that they have in their bark, the thing that calls them a redwood, is actually from tannic acid, tannins, which you actually have in wine as well. It makes redwoods completely fireproof. It makes the bark fireproof, I should say. It also makes them insect and fungus free because none of them can deal with the tannic acid. So redwoods are incredibly strong. And something that we saw in the forest that was incredible is that Fire can sometimes break through the weakest points in the bark, and it can actually hollow out the inside of the tree because the whole inner part of the tree is actually dead tissue, whereas the living part of the tree is the bark and the layer right underneath the bark. So that's where the redwood can continue to grow. So even if fire gets in and it destroys all of the inner part of the tree, literally hollows out the entire redwood, the redwood will keep growing, and over hundreds of years, it will actually heal its own scars. So I think that is just, I don't have any other words other than awe-inspiring. I feel absolute wonder when I look at redwoods, when I hear about redwoods. I want to be a redwood in my next life. They are, again, just so wise and ancient, and I think they're here to teach us lessons. And so I share all of this about redwoods because a few weeks ago, I had actually heard about a study where they had injected some redwoods with this chemical that is extremely similar to adrenaline. And they wanted to do it to show what would happen if they would make sure the redwoods could not hibernate. And by injecting this adrenaline, the redwoods would not rest or sleep during winter. And so when they took away the option of hibernation, they found that the redwoods that they had injected died within a year. So remember, I just told you, these ancient trees can live for thousands and thousands of years. And yet with 1 year where they could not hibernate, where they could not rest, where they could not rejuvenate and heal themselves, they all died. And so I found this to be the main connection between the idea of Samhain and the idea of these trees, which is that at Samhain, as I said, it is the harvest festival. It is the chance to punctuate time between all of the hard work you've done in the summer and all of the rest you're about to do in the winter. Because during Samhain, you gather everything you've harvested, you preserve it, and it's a chance to start bringing the light indoors. So that's when you start lighting fires in your home. You keep the hearth warm, and you sit around the table telling stories with one another and having food with one another. And it's this chance to slow down and rest and essentially reflect what nature is doing. In the spring, nature is blooming. Everything is starting to grow again. It's the time of fresh ideas and new projects. And then in the summer, it is working. Everything is in full bloom. You are growing things, and the sun is at its strongest. And the sun is the power of growth and work and achievement. And then you get to autumn, a chance where the temperature starts to cool down a little bit, and trees start to shed what isn't serving them anymore, what they're not going to need for the winter. So they shed their leaves, and things just start to generally slow down a little bit. Again, the work of the summer is complete, and things slow down and get cold and prepare for the dark, cold months ahead. And then we have winter. Now, winter is the chance for hibernation. When we look at almost every other species, every species has some form of hibernation. We know that bears literally will climb into a little den for all of winter. And for months, they're resting, they're sleeping, and then they're really hungry when they come out. And because they have gotten the chance to rest and rejuvenate and sleep all winter long, by the time the sun finally shines again and flowers are in full bloom in the spring, they want to get out. They want to fight for food and do things again. And the same is true for our species, for human beings. We have forgotten about this in the modern world. But even with this concept of Samhain was celebrated by human beings. It wasn't celebrated by bears. And so the whole idea was that you come inside, you slow down, and then for all of winter, you are not working. You are simply fighting to stay warm and fighting to survive, but also enjoying any moment that you can. You are symbolically bringing the light indoors by bringing in love and food and stories, but you're also physically bringing light inside by lighting candles and keeping the fireplace warm. And so the connection between Sow-in and these redwoods that weren't allowed to hibernate is just the message that I think we all need to hear this time of year, which is that it's okay to slow down. You know, we often believe or pretend that we are in constant spring. We are in constant bloom. We're in constant productivity. There's no time to rest or slow down. And that is absolute bogus. It is not true and it's not good for us. And I know that that might be unconventional in this modern day society where everything is moving so fast. And if you take a break from your social media, you're going to mess with the algorithm. And if you're not producing content or talking to your customers all the time, whatever your role in this world, whatever your career is, there's this fear that you will fall behind and you won't be able to catch up again. But I think the truth of the matter and what we can learn from nature, what we can learn from Sow-in and what we can learn from these redwoods is that when we take the time to slow down, to go inwards, to rest, and to truly hibernate, we will actually have so much more energy to bloom again in the spring. So that is my message for you today. That is my other gift for you today. I am giving you permission to hibernate, my friend. I am giving me permission to hibernate. I want us to slow down and I want us to carve out some space in our lives, even if it means you can take a few days off of work, or maybe around the holidays in December, you can take a full week off work, whatever it may be. I want you to actually carve out some space and time where you're not just doing more things, where you're not just, maybe around the holidays going to Christmas parties and Hanukkah parties and things like that, but actual time and space where you can rest, where you can read a book you've been wanting to read, where you can binge watch a few movies you've been wanting to watch, where you can take a nap in the middle of the day and when you wake up, it doesn't even matter what time it is because you're not paying attention to time and you remember that that's completely man-made. So I want you to take the opportunity to listen to your body, listen to your soul, figure out what you need, and then take it and hibernate. So with that, I will get down off of my high horse for today, and I will just send you a few more hugs, so much more love, and let you know that I cannot wait to see you again next week. I hope that you take some time to teach someone about the concepts you learned today and just to internalize them and figure out how you can use the message of Sow-in and the redwoods for your own benefit. Okay, my friends, I love you. I love you. I love you. I see you. I hear you. And I appreciate every single one of you listening out there. I will talk to you again soon. And that is goodbye for now.